The first weeks back at Briarwood were interesting ones. Every one was kind and cordial, and Catherine supposed it was a good thing that they left immediately for their honeymoon, that it perhaps gave the household some time to speak to Lord Justin and see that he approved the match. In another way, she was glad the walls couldn't talk. Robert took her through the entire estate after breakfast one day, beginning in the attics where numerous household servants had their quarters, though some lived in the cottages around the edge of the property. There were also storage rooms on the floor just below the attic, as well as a room that appeared at first at a library, but which opened up into a secret area where goods, coin, and other objects could be stored in the event of war or attack. He also took her through the gallery where there were pictures of the family as well as tapestries, some of which depicted the War of the Roses or scenes from that stormy period when Henry VIII ruled England. He led her through various bedrooms, named after their colors, such as the violet room or the grey room. There were 20 in all, and many had adjacent sitting rooms or intimate parlors. Theirs was the green room, which amused Catherine, as green had always been a favorite color of hers. After the midday meal, she changed into her riding habit to see the rest of the property. Robert showed her the groomsmen's stable over which many of the grooms lived and the numerous outbuildings. As they made their way around the property, he pointed out a disused mine and told her it was often referred to as an old scat bale. Most of the tin mines are active around here, though. It's how we financed much of the war, and if you can't believe it, it was the Queen's idea. I could believe virtually anything that willful lady does, Catherine chuckled. He then showed her the walls of the enclosed garden, which was divided into quarters and eighths by lower walls and hedges. Every bed was patterned with flowers and herbs, some tall, some creeping, bright shoots mingled with dull green. On the far side of the garden, a second gate gave access to a small orchard, where bees bumbled among blossoms in the sunshine. Heady fragrances came and went on the breeze, and Catherine found them refreshing. Carinsa certainly has a gift for gardening, Catherine commented. Without a doubt, she's the best gardener in Cornwall, and so talented with her herbs and formulas. She tended Sarah's husband and 2 other workers when they were dying of ague a few years ago and made their last weeks far more comfortable. She's managed domestic matters here since she was about 17, but I know she much prefers gardening in her still room to manor duties. Of course, it's primarily a matter of delegating such duties to Sarah. Yes, Catherine thought, which she does with relish. Let's ride over to the cottages. You've probably seen them already, the row of Tudor ones on the edge of the estate. I'll introduce you to the tenants, who will be very fond of you. The cottages look beautiful, with the sun shining on their ancient red bricks, overhanging gables and latticed windows. There were 21 cottages, each surrounded by several plots of ground and some older ones as well. They are quite attractive, but the interiors must be dark, she remarked when they discussed how the marvelous little structure had stood the test of time. But he admitted that some complained of too little light. Have you ever thought of changing the windows for those tenants? Catherine asked. Yes, Julian and I raised the subject several times, but they indicated in no certain terms that it would be practically criminal. Robert smiled at his wife. Yes, they are lovely just the way they are, she said, and it does seem like changing them would spoil it in a way. You will soon get to know everyone who gets their living here. We always like a contented community. Many of them work the farms or have trades, but there are some shut-ins and elderly ones as well. We make sure they have what they need. When they were almost back to the stables, Robert called a greeting to one of the men, but received a mere grunt in return, which he seemed to find amusing. What a churlish fellow, Catherine said, and Robert chuckled. That's Reginald Dunning, a Puritan as fierce as your father and wants the world to know it. He's usually quite rude. I think he's condescended to grunt to us merely because you were with me. I find him humorous. He's not shy about letting us know he despises us for what he calls our extravagances. Yet nothing would move him to work on another estate. Catherine smiled and thought how tolerant Robert was. What does he do here? She asked. He keeps the stables in proper order and has charge of some of the livestock. He's quite good at it, and he's much kinder to his son, Edward, than your father ever was to you. But the rest of us he has no use for. At this, Robert laughed again. Well, he should realize that if this was the way where he gets his living, then you at least deserve some respect. Now, Kat, would you attempt to talk reason to a Puritan? And Catherine had to laugh as well. One thing for sure, Edward is pleased to be out from under his father's roof and living at Briarwood now. He left off living with Reginald and took quarters here when his duties and salary were increased. It's high time, too. He's 28 years old. He's never married for some reason, though. Maybe their prospective father-in-law scared off any suitable ladies, Catherine smiled. That could be very, very well be. I'll tell you a secret, Robert said mischievously. Edward is besotted with Sarah, and I think if she would consent to look his way, there might be a very nice match there. They are the same age, and Edward had a good education, too, so they would be able to enjoy conversation with each other. When you say condescend to look his way, what do you mean exactly? I probably shouldn't make statements that sound so impolite. I don't mean to infer Sarah is unpleasant, because in truth she is opposite. I always found her a lively girl to talk to, and her demeanor is typically very nice. He paused a moment, as if deciding how to continue. I think sometimes she feels she is caught in that in-between world, such as is the case with governesses. She's not quite a servant, but not a family member either. I always thought that was difficult for them, and I think maybe Sarah tells herself that marriage to a mere worker on the property is beneath her, since she is essentially a female majordomo. Catherine was thoughtful for a moment. I admit I saw precisely what you mean when I was a governess for a short time. I always wanted to take meals with the rest of the servants, but the butler was positively horrified. He claimed governesses don't lower themselves to eat with servants, which I found preposterous. Yet I knew without being told that they certainly did not dine with the family. I would have preferred meals in the kitchen with the rest of the staff to those lonely trays in my room, she sighed. Just then, Rook and one of the grooms rode up to the couple and said that Lance had suddenly become ill. Some type of congestion of the chest, and Robert asked if they thought he needed a doctor. When it did not sound that bad, Robert told the men that he would have one of Carinsa's cures delivered to Lance as soon as possible. When the men rode off, Catherine asked Robert if she could go fetch the remedy. She thought it would be a great opportunity to try to get to know Carinsa a bit, something she secretly felt she was failing at miserably. Of course, Robert did not object, and the two went their separate ways upon arriving home. These gardens were actually started by Lord Justin's mother, Carinsa said, when Catherine remarked about their beauty. She was very interested in herbs and healing, and she passed a lot of her knowledge on to Jennifer, but it really wasn't Jennifer's passion. However, I gleaned everything I could from her over the years. I was intrigued as soon as I heard about it. The rest I just picked up here and there, as one does with any subject, I suppose. I'm sure I can make something for Lance if you don't mind waiting. Of course not, Catherine said, noticing the heady, aromatic fragrance of flowers and herbs as they went through the gate from the garden to the still room. She looked around and saw rows of plants in their own separate sections, precisely laid out. Along the garden's fair wall was a profusion of rose bushes, and Catherine thought that the scent of the perfume mixed with that of the herbs made a lovely fragrance. She followed Carinsa to the shed, where shelves of pots lined the walls and dried herbs hung from the ceiling. There was a small charcoal brazier in the middle of the room. "This won't take very long," Carinsa said. "Please have a seat on that chair in the sun. It's quite pleasant at this time." Catherine did as she recommended and observed as she went about crushing certain ingredients together and placing them in a bottle with honey and wine. Catherine watched silently, feeling the warmth of the September sun on her shoulders, and thought the still room and the garden seemed very peaceful. I generally use leaves of crushed almonds with a bit of mustard for coughs. I believe it worked once before for Lance when he had this very illness. "You're very dedicated," Catherine said, thinking Carinsa seemed more alive in this room than anywhere the grand home in which she lived. "Once I brewed up a concoction for Lizette when they first moved here. She went to a villager who fancied herself as an apothecary, but of course she didn't know what she was doing with no education." Catherine purposely did not respond, being a little unsure whether Carinsa had said certain things deliberately or merely spoke without thinking. "Lizette is Paul's sister, isn't she? It seems they are all good friends," and she saw a wry twist of Carinsa's lips that she didn't quite understand. "Well, Paul became fast friends with Julian and Robert almost immediately. Lizette, I believe, had designs on one of them as a husband." She looked over at Catherine and smiled. Well, now she must obviously focus on Julian. Catherine smiled back. She seems a colorful young lady from what I've heard. I should like to meet her sometime, Catherine said. Certainly, perhaps I will get a chance to introduce you at the ball, Carinza replied, referring to the masquerade ball Robert and Catherine had planned to celebrate their marriage. However, she's not as intelligent as you, and you'd probably not have anything in common with her. Catherine nodded and smiled to show that she understood, although inwardly she was perplexed. Just moments ago, she wondered if Carinza was insulting her with her remark about uneducated villagers. And she had now given her what was sounded like a genuine compliment. She came back inside after sending Rook with the formula, still puzzling over Carinza's odd attitude. A near collision with Julian jolted her out of her reverie as he came whirling around one of the smaller staircases in the home. Do you make a habit of trampling people? She asked, startled. Perhaps if you didn't make a habit of gliding through the manor like a ghost, there would be fewer such collisions. But even as he said it, he knew that he stepped lightly with an unusual grace he had rarely seen before. Well, I shall try to be less ghost-like, Catherine answered, but perhaps you shouldn't charge through the manor like a horse gone mad, as that would also go a long way toward avoiding such collisions. Feeling an inordinate amount of anger at her sharp retort, Julian decided to abandon all pretense of civility and said, I wouldn't think you could turn such phrases. At least you won't embarrass Robert in polite company. Catherine wanted to slap his face, but realized that if words set him seething, it was words with which she would do battle. You never fooled me for one moment, Julian. You're not angry because you think I'm not good enough for your brother. You're angry because I chose him instead of you. Cutting to the quick of the matter, as she did, enraged him even further. You arrogant little chit. Who says I wanted you in the first place? Well, a few days before Robert and I were wed, I was left with that impression when you invited me for a romp in bed at the inn. Oh, did I? I'd forgotten, he lied. But if I did, it was only to help Robert out. That way you wouldn't go to your new husband, a shrieking violet. Well, according to what he told me on our honeymoon, I would never have shrunk, she said, with an uncharacteristic urge to goad him even further, rather than retreat from confrontation, which was far more in keeping with her nature. Her words provoked him as desired. We both know you are nothing more than adventurous. Judging by your propositions over the last year, it would seem you are the one intent on advertising or adventuring, so I will leave you to it. I'm sure another village girl will appear for you to pester in my place. With that, she swept past him. She's a witch and a siren, and I wish she had never come here. But as he strode away, he couldn't help but face that she had won that battle, and mused again at her demeanor and elocution. He shrugged to himself, realizing that his brother had obviously become aware of this long before, and it gave him the confidence to marry her. Nevertheless, she still wondered if she were going to have a baby. That was the ultimate reason for the quick wedding. And that's the end of today's show. Thank you so much for listening on this Monday, May 3rd, 2021. I hope you are having a great day wherever you are, and stay tuned tomorrow for the next episode.